With the density increase in Nightmare dungeons for Diablo 4, I wanted to go through each dungeon and make a tier list to see which ones are the best for farming experience and for leveling up your glyphs. I went through each dungeon at least 3 times, some of them 4 or 5 times, to give you the most accurate Nightmare dungeon tier list available. Looking at the data, it is sectioned off into different tiers, and both are accompanied with a bar graph to help show the differences. The cyan-colored S tier being the best, and the magenta-colored OOF tier being the worst. If possible, I would stick with just the S and A tier dungeons, and only dip into the B tiers if you have no other option. Otherwise, I'd salvage anything below the B tier for leveling your character. So the best dungeons for leveling up are Older's Cave, Hoarfrost Demise, Immortal Emanation, and Domhain Tunnels, with the Hoarfrost Demise being the clear winner for glyph leveling. I have the link for the spreadsheet below if you want to take a look at that. Otherwise, the rest of the video is going to explain how I compiled this data. In order for this list to have some sort of integrity, I had to make a list of rules for myself when collecting the data. Rule 1 being for whatever build I have at the start of the run, I will continue to use until the end. So I'm running a Bone Spear Necro with the Barber Malignant Heart, making this easy enough. Run in, throw a couple spears, and everything explodes. I'm also not using my ultimate throughout the run. Since the cooldown is a lot longer and it's not a skill that I spam at will, I wasn't confident that I'd be able to consistently use Bone Storm the same number of times per run. So instead of worrying about that, I just removed the variable. And the easiest example for why we don't want to level up our gear, we don't want to find boots that give us a better movement speed or movement speed after killing elites boost, so that would just screw up all the data for any previous runs. The next obstacle becomes what do I do when gaining paragon points and leveling up. Even without this tier list, the greatest thing about this density patch is that we now gain a lot of experience. Looking at the datasheet, I have some runs from before the update. Comparing these to the post-update runs, we're gaining at least 3 times more experience on every dungeon. That's just awesome and definitely a welcome addition, but the problem with this is for the tier list, we're going to be gaining levels like crazy, so what do we do about that? This is where rule number 2 comes in, being no upgrading the Paragon board. Paragon is a way to make the character spiral way out of control, and I didn't want to run into a situation where my later runs are just destroying any of my starting level 75 runs. So to counter this, I just didn't use any Paragon and ended up with 47 points to give at the end. I definitely didn't think that I would be leveling 12 times to complete this list. Rule 3 is trying to keep the enemy level difference at 0 as much as possible. This is just for consistency. Since we know that more experience is gained or lost depending on our level compared to the enemy monster level, we want to make sure that we're keeping the difference between the two as similar as possible for each dungeon. So we don't want this dungeon to have a +3, this one to have a +9, another one to have a +5, because now the data isn't as accurate as it could be. So I try to keep everything at 0, but there's the odd -1 or +1 here or there, depending on if I leveled up during the run, or I just couldn't find the same level sigil from RNG. The main thing is that this number doesn't necessarily have to be 0, just that the number in this column needs to be consistent. I want to simplify this data as much as possible. Rule 4 is not opening any chests, using any shrines, elixirs, or XP blessings. Again, we want everything to be as consistent as possible from run to run. Rule number 5 is running each dungeon at least 3 times. This is more of a personal preference. I've seen tier lists from other creators where they only run each dungeon 1 time and use that as their data, but I feel like that's just wrong, for a lack of better words. If only 1 run is used, maybe it was a good fast run, or a slower, had to backtrack, forgot something run. Maybe the RNG on the affixes were really good or really bad. A good example of this was my Core Valar runs. There's a 2-minute difference in between 2 of these runs, so which one is correct? If I only use the first one, it's a good dungeon, but if I only use the data from the 3rd try, it's a slower dungeon. I believe we can get more accurate data on these Nightmare dungeons when we run them multiple times. That's also part of the reason why I ran each Malignant Tunnel 10 times. I wanted to make the data as accurate as possible. Lastly, you may have noticed that Nastrava only has 1 run listed, and this was because I could not find a sigil for this dungeon except for this one listed throughout the entire process. Somehow I was able to complete the 29 other dungeons at least 3 times through random drops or crafting sigils, but all I could get for Nastrava was a single sigil that was 3 levels higher than my character. This makes it so it's the only dungeon that isn't as accurate as the other 29. So with that, I hope this was helpful. Like I said, link in the description, and let me know if there are other lists that I can create. I actually enjoy running all these dungeons and recording all this data to share, so yeah, that's all I got for now. Talk to you soon.